Hello everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of For Those About to Pod, We Salute You. On this episode, Matt and I will be discussing Supergroups, Matt's albums of 1990, hidden gems, and the latest news in rock today. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to our podcast via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you'll find us on Facebook and Twitter as well. But as always, let's kick the show off with my co-conspirator and co-host, Mr. Matt Rogers. Hey Matt, how are you?
Brian, hello. Nice to see you, hear from you again.
And you,
as always. So what's been happening? What's caught my eye or my ear, as we like to say? So a few things actually. Whitesnake are calling it a day in 2022, which is quite sad, really. And for those who saw us for those of us who saw them, who've seen them throughout the years, it's always been a great experience seeing Whitesnake, and they've done some fantastic albums over the years. So they've announced that they're going to call it a day in 2022. I'm not sure whether it will be. I doubt whether it will be one of those kind of long goodbyes that will take 5 years, a la the Scorpions, who told us in 2015 this was their farewell tour, and they're still on it. But no sad news. I first saw Whitesnake in 1981. I think they formed it about 1978. So they've had a long career, successful career. You like a bit of Whitesnake, of course, don't you, Brian?
I do indeed. I think when we've done the list of who's your favorite rock lead vocalists, it's a bit like my favorite band, changes every week.
Is it Whitesnake this week then? What are you trying to say?
Do you know what? For the purposes of the show, let's make it Whitesnake this week. But no,
okay.
Yeah, DC, David Coverdale has always been up there with Robert Plant and Paul Rogers. It would be nice, I have to say, if you're going to close the chapter, on Whitesnake, and it's really interesting over the years. How Whitesnake have the sound has developed. You can go through the 78, the period that you were able to see them in, and probably culminating in the Saints and Sinners album. And then you go into the Slide It In album, and then you go into hair metal Tawny Kitten period thereafter.
Yeah.
And I think that's where there'll always be those people who will look at Donington 1990, and then there'll be those who will look at 1983. But the songs have always been great. And I was going to say, be nice if maybe, I know Bernie, maybe get Bernie out, or maybe do a set which has got a few more of the bluesier tracks. If you're gonna close the circle, maybe just pay a little bit of homage to some of the older stuff, as he's done with the Purple album that he did, where he sang some of the Purple stuff.
That would be nice. That would be nice. I agree. So yeah, good night, Whitesnake, but not for a couple of years yet, so we can enjoy them for a while.
We wish them well.
We do. Hey, I see what you did there. Very clever. Also, and I don't like to talk about Diamond Head too much, but I have to mention that they've done a magnificent version of the Metallica song No Remorse, which they put out as a teaser for their new album, which is re-recording. We talked about it a couple of podcasts ago.
Yeah.
A teaser for the new Lightning to the Nation re-recorded album. No Remorse, which was on the first Metallica album, Kill 'Em All. And I am a bit biased, I admit that. But I recommend everyone go onto YouTube, or whatever medium you use to watch or listen to music. Put your headphones on, watch the video, which is absolutely amazing, terrifying video. But I do have a very, very low sort of fear threshold. But amazing version, brilliant version. Dare I say it, better than the original.
I agree. Do you know what? When you'd mentioned it, about the Diamond Head track, I listened to their version first, which I thought was very well produced. I thought it was really well done. You can definitely tell it's a Metallica tune with the singer's vocal characterization. And then I went to the Kill 'Em All version, and I went, oh, that production's not very good at all. Or, sorry,
No.
what year would that have been? Would that have been 83, 84?
83, 84
Yeah.
was Kill 'Em All. So it's a decent time ago. Things have moved on production wise, but yeah, I love it, and I love the video, and I can't wait for the album. And then finally, one thing which I've both watched and listened to, and I can recommend again, is a song called "Distance" by Mammoth WVH, which is Wolfgang Van Halen, Eddie Van Halen's song. And the song "Distance" was written during the time leading up to Eddie Van Halen's death, and we spoke a lot about Eddie Van Halen a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But I recommend everyone and bring some tissues, because the video is amazing. It's very, very poignant. It's basically home footage of Wolfgang Van Halen. But as I say, is Eddie Van Halen's son, is now a performer in his own right, who's been with Mark Tremonti, and he's been with Van Halen themselves. Yeah. But the song is excellent, and the video is very, it's very, very poignant. So yeah, for different reasons than the other recommendations, take a look at that. So that's what's caught my eye recently, Brian.
Yeah.
I have to say,
and I have to say, I listened to them. I listened to a nice little touch that he called it Mammoth as well too, because that was the precursor. That was one of the original names for Van Halen before they took the name. But a good singer, I have to say. He
is a good singer. Surprisingly good.
Very well impressed with. It's one of those things. It's one of those things. Well, we've talked about this, about having that physical copy where you would pick up the CD and go, right, what didn't Wolfgang do? Does he play he's actually supposed to be a really good drummer. So it'll be interesting to see, has he just done everything on the track? But no, I agree with you. A really, really, really good track. For me, what's caught my eye in the news over the last little while, a couple of things for me. Probably first off, and again, I was listening to this over the weekend, was the new Iron Maiden live album. Which is live in Mexico City on the Legacy of the Beast tour. I've given it a good couple of listens, and I think what's frightening, and this is where you kind of go, the years go by, and some bands' time is kind to, and some bands' time is not kind to. And when I looked at the track listing for the new album, it's got quite a lot of Live After Death tracks on it. It's got, and I just thought, well, here we are in 2020. It's a really good album. It's got a nice mix of new material. It's got Klansman. It's even got Klansman, and so it's good. Yeah. And then I went, when was Live After Death released? It was released 35 years ago.
I know, amazing. 35 years ago. Yes, I agree with you. I've listened to the album. It's called Nights of the Dead, and it was recorded on the Legacy of the Beast tour, which I went to, and I loved it. I mean, I love Iron Maiden, and I loved the show I went to. Do we need another Iron Maiden live album? Well, if you're an Iron Maiden fan, yes, probably. They've done a lot of them. You're right. I mean, it was essentially a greatest hit. It was a Legacy of the Beast, so it was kind of almost a celebration of all their eras, really.
Yes.
But I don't know. I liked it.
I liked it too. And the other thing that caught my eye was earlier in November. One of my favorite bands, the lead singer Tony Lewis. Tony Lewis was the front man. I'm going to call them pop rock or power pop band called The Outfield. As we've started to do, we're putting together a playlist of all of the bands and who we mentioned. So we'll put some Outfield on. So Tony passed away last month. He was 62. The Outfield Outfield were massive in the mid 80s. They had a single called Your Love. It's in loads of TV things in America. The album Play Deep went triple platinum in America. Went absolutely massive. So Tony's family have just posthumously released an EP with 6 tracks on it. It's called More Than I Dared. So I would say people check it out. It's a nice. Tony he recorded a couple of solo things, but that was nice. It came out last week, and I think what's nice as well too is it's been done for charity. So the sales from the single and probably the streaming as well too goes to Music Care. So something. So that was the other thing that caught my eye was unfortunately the passing of Tony.
Yeah, sad times. And he was very young. He's 62. Is no age, is it?
No,
so,
it's not at all.
Yeah,
not at all.
Yeah, well said, Brian. Well said. Okay, shall we move on?
We can do. Yes, indeed.
So last time we spoke, you challenged. You laid down the gauntlet.
I did.
Of our regular feature of My Year in Rock, which I think I might have just made that up. It's quite sounds quite good, doesn't it?
It does.
My year in rock. So you challenged me with 1990, which I remember well. I was still only a young boy then, of course.
How old were you, Matthew?
I was. How old was I in 1990? 25.
It's okay.
Something like that, anyway. Let's just say 20. No, I was 25. So you asked me what my musical memories were, and particularly what albums I was listening to in 1990, and I've got my top 5, which I will go through briefly.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked last time about sort of 10-year cycles, and when I talk about these albums, you'll see that I think this was indeed the start of another 10-year cycle, because it's very interesting. And I thought about the albums that I'd bought actually back in the day. There are lots of albums obviously released in 1990. Yeah. As there are every year, of course. But I thought I'd
and long may albums continue to be released.
Well, of course, and we've just covered a couple recently, obviously. So I thought about the albums that I bought at the time, and I'm going to go through them in sort of reverse order in time-honored fashion. So at number 5, which was released in 1990, was Gary Moore's "Still Got the Blues," which I think was his first. I mean, you're a bigger blues and Gary Moore fan, but you're a bigger Gary Moore fan than I am. But I bought "Still Got the Blues." It was one of those early. Actually, it was one of the 1990 was, I think, first time I was buying CDs. So these were some of the early CDs.
I was buying a lot of singles then, after CD singles. Yeah.
Did you buy Remember Decimalisation then?
I didn't buy it on CD.
Oh, no. Okay. Just checking. So anyway, Still Got the Blues, which I bought at the time, which has got some great songs on it.
Yeah.
Obviously the title track, Still Got the Blues. Oh Pretty Woman's on there. Walking by Myself, which is my own personal favourite song on the album. I remember that album very well. And it was quite a departure for Gary Moore. He'd been more kind of, obviously, he'd been in that band that we're not allowed to talk about in the 70s, Skid Row. And then he got on to play in the other band that we're not allowed to talk about. And then he'd done a lot of kind of solid rock stuff in the 80s.
Yes.
And he'd worked with a lot of people in that era. And he still did on that album. He worked with Don Airey features a lot, who you've met. We'll maybe talk about that another day.
Absolutely.
Don Airey. Bob Daisy's on there. Brian Downey's on there.
I've met him.
It's good. It's a good album. Good solid blues album. Do you remember that album, Brian?
I do. I remember Gary always flirted with the blue. When you look at some of the, even when he was doing, when he did the album before Still Got the Blues, which was after the war, which was to me was a great rock album. You know, Cozy Powell drummed on it. Bob Daisley was on it. Even Ozzy Osbourne sang on Lead Clones, which is it's a pastiche of Kashmir and whatever, but it's tongue in cheek, and it's a really good rock. It's a really good rock album, and I think rock in 1989 didn't need a Gary Moore in leather trousers. It wanted Europe, Skid Row, Vixen, Warrant. That's so. Fair play to Bob Daisley, because Bob Daisley was the one who kind of put it into Gary's mind. I think you should do a blues album, because Bob always thought that Gary was a great blues player. Obviously, the greeny guitar that Kirk Hammett now has was with Gary for many years. So, I think, do you know what was good about that album with Gary? Gary kept to the blues. I know Albert Collins is on the album. I'm trying to think who actually guested. There was who was the main guitarist that played on "Oh Pretty Woman"?
It will come to me.
Yeah, because I can remember. I remember the tale that Gary told was a lot of the old blues guys, because B.B. King played on his second album on After Hours. So what Gary was doing, it was Albert King. Albert King.
Yeah, it was Albert King.
Albert King played on it,
absolutely.
And supposedly in the studio, Albert was really, came in. Just did the session, and Gary was like, "Oh my goodness, this he's the real deal. If he could have pulled out a gun and just got on the plane, I've done my session, then go home." It was like Albert King was like not to be messed with. So do you know what? For your first album of 1990, a very solid start, young man.
You like that? I knew you'd like that, because you're a big Gary Moore fan. Secondly, Manic Nirvana by Robert Plant. I was, and still am, great Led Zepp fan. Are they my favourite band? They're up there. And Robert Plant, as we know, has had a long, illustrious solo career.
Yeah,
pretty much since Led Zepp finished. And he's still going. He reinvents himself every 3 years. Bless him. And Manic Nirvana was in that kind of 80s, 90s, quite rocky. He hadn't really moved on to being too experimental then.
No.
And Manic Nirvana is a great album. Again, I bought it at the time, and it's got some good songs in it. Hurting Kind's on there.
Bought a single. I remember buying this. I remember buying the single. Yeah, good, really good.
Tie Dye on the Highway is on there as well. So some good stuff on there. I mean, it's classic. It's classic kind of 80s, 90s Plant, really. He moved on to Fate of Nations after that, which is when I think he did all that kind of sampling of old Led Zepp songs and everything.
Yeah.
He kind of then embraced the legacy then. Good old Robert. So number 4 on my list is Manic Nirvana by Robert Plant.
Yes, good show.
So far we had a bit of blues, we had a bit of classic, 70s rock. Number 3 is Backstreet Symphony, which is the debut album by the Mighty Thunder, of course.
Yay!
Which was released in 1990. And actually thinking about it, so a couple of things that struck me looking back on that. So 90's a great first album, and a lot of the songs that are on that album are still in their set.
Yeah. So
obviously the title track, She's So Fine, Love Walked In, Dirty Love. I mean, great songs. And as I say, still in their set today. The album was produced by one Andy Taylor.
He was, and co-wrote quite a lot of material.
He did. He certainly co-wrote She's So Fine. But Andy Taylor from Duran Duran was the producer. They did, and then on top of that, he did a really good cover of "Give Me Some Lovin'," the old Spencer Davis Group song, which I think kind of paved the way for Thunder, because they've never really shied away from doing a cover.
No,
and the covers they've done have been great.
Brown Sugar. Brown Sugar is a brilliant cover that they did for a charity. They did a charity album. It's like a Stones tribute album, and there's a live version of Brown Sugar, and it's just fabulous.
One of my favourite covers by them is, we talked about Frankie Miller last time actually, but the old Frankie Miller song, as Daddy Bose introduces it on the album, Be Good to Yourself. So anyway, so number 3.
So can I just ask, because of all of the when was the first time you saw Thunder? Did you see them when they started out, or did you?
No, I was quite a late joiner to the Thunder. I didn't see them live till, well, in the 21st century, to be honest with you. I can't remember exactly when. I've seen them a few times over the years. But no, funny you should ask that, because it leads me on to something else I was going to just mention. So Thunder were one of those sort of early 90s Brit rock bands, and a bit like Nwabum, really. And we talked last time and earlier about 10-year cycles, and 1990 for me was, and maybe slightly earlier, 89, 90 was. I look back and when I was there at the time, thought, this is great. It was the birth of a lot of those British bands, bands like Skin and Little Angels and Wild Hearts, Choir Boys, Thunder themselves, The Almighty. There was a whole gang of Television.
Yeah.
And I nailed my colours to the Little Angels flag, as it were, or whatever the expression is. Yeah. So I was a big Little Angels fan. I saw them back in the day, but I didn't see Thunder.
I was lucky. I was lucky enough to see Thunder in 1990. Okay. Yep. They actually supported Heart. And again, it's one of those things where in good old Northern Ireland in 1990, we got to see
you had an abundance of gigs, of course, didn't you? Too many to
we
to
did.
Go to.
I can remember we had it felt like all of our Christmases came at once, because in the King's Hall in Belfast we had Heart came, they were promoting Brigade, and Thunder were the support act, and literally everybody was there. I'd bought the picture disc of Backstreet Symphony, the single, so it was probably the second or third single out, because I think She's So Fine was She's So Fine or Dirty Love was one of the first singles, and they just came on stage, and Thunder were just, it was just like Bad Company revisited. It was just classic blues, British blues rock. Heart came out and did their set, and then the next week we had Yngwie Malmsteen came, and then later that year Iron Maiden came for the first time to Northern Ireland. So it was like we had 3 big concerts, and it was like, oh my goodness, the floodgates have opened. So I'm really pleased I got to see Thunder as a support band, because they're one of the few bands that I'm able to say I got to see them coming up, and didn't get to see them again till we went to see them at High Oldage. And they were equally tremendous.
They were amazing. That was their kind of comeback, wasn't it?
Yeah.
2010, 11.
I'm liking your album choices. These are good.
Well, that's the idea, my friend, you see. Hopefully other people will too. So, Backstreet Symphony, great album, debut album. And I suppose when maybe one time we'll talk about, the best debut albums, but that must be up there, I guess. I know they weren't, they were Terraplane, kind of, before they became Thunder, of course. So they weren't, fresh out of school kind of thing, but certainly a great debut album. And as I say, the birth, in one respect, of this new era of Brit rock. Speaking of new eras, my second album, which again I bought at the time, was or is Facelift by Alice in Chains.
Oofed.
Which again, I was 30 years on, I still listen to it. It's a great album of that era. And I was actually, it was funny actually, because I was thinking about when I first came across Alice in Chains, and it was that album, which is again their I think it's their debut album. And I remember watching MTV and seeing the video for Man in the Box, which again I recommend that. Go and find it on YouTube. Because there's a line in it about can you sew them shut, as in sew my eyes shut, which is I wouldn't advise it, frankly. No. But they did enough kind of makeup and prosthetics in the video to give the impression that Lane Staley had his eyes shut, which or eyes sewn shut, as I said. But some great songs on that, as I say, Man in the Box itself, We Die Young, and 1990. We've talked about it before. Very early grunge, although I'm not sure you could bracket Alice in Chains as grunge. They went out quite soon after that with bands like Anthrax on the Clash of the Titans tour as the opening band. So it's kind of a mix of genres in one respect, but they were very heavy, and the harmonized vocals between Elaine Staley and Jerry Cantrell. I mean, a thing to behold.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, number 2, Facelift from Alice in Chains. So they're an eclectic mix so far, and it becomes even more eclectic when I tell you my number 1 album, which again influenced at the time by MTV. So I was in America in 1990.
George Michael.
And I was watching.
Was it George Michael's "Listen Like Prejudice"?
It's not. That didn't make the top 5. Although I have to say that's good. It's got some good songs in it. That album. Don't diss the George.
I'm not dissing the George.
No, number 1 is it might surprise you actually. Is "Time's Up" by Living Colour.
No, we've got plenty of time left. We've only 25 minutes into it.
Dear, the old ones are the best. How long were you working on that gag, Brian?
I haven't
been. Time's Up, which was the second album by Living Colour. So I was in America, as I said earlier, and I was watching MTV, and they were playing the single "Type," which is quite a hard rock song. In fact, the album itself is a bit of a mixture of everything, really. There's some really heavy stuff on there, and then there's kind of funky bluesy stuff. Against some great songs: "Love Rears Its Ugly Head," "Elvis Is Dead" with Little Richard singing on it, "Type" itself, and there's other weird and wonderful contributors to that album.
Yeah,
Mick Jagger's on it doing backing vocals.
Did they support? Did Living Colour go out and support the Stones?
Yeah, I seem to recall that. I think Mick Jagger was a big kind of advocate of Living Colour.
Yeah.
And he was on that album. But yeah, listen to it. Great album, great songs. I had it on cassette. That's how long ago it was. Because I probably couldn't afford the CD, and I played the cassette to death. One of those things where you play one side, flip it over, play the next side. Yeah. But yeah, I'll give you, to use your expression, from 1990, my favourite album, "Time's Up" by Living Colour.
We were lucky enough to, and isn't it interesting? They played Rambling Man last year, and they were brilliant. And I got to see them again at Steelhouse. And we seem Bernie seems to come up everywhere, because I think Bernie Marsden actually got up and guested with them on at the Steelhouse Festival.
Right. Okay,
but no, I Living Colour were a bit edgy for me in 1990. I was probably there was the political age to them, and it was a little bit too. I didn't get Corey Glover's vocals till I listened to "Love Rears Up Its Ugly Head." That's when I got interested in them. But they always seem to be packaged up. You mentioned about Alice in Chains earlier on, about I think Pantera and the thrash guys. Alice in Chains used to support them, and I'm almost certain that like Living Colour were in Atlantic Records, I think. And they would go out with the likes of Anthrax, and
that's right.
and I think they went out with King's X went out with them as well too. So they were always kind of you could never pigeonhole Living Colour, which I think is what really is interesting about them, because they can come back, and their material's always been interesting. And musically, seeing them live, they really are good. So tip top for 1990.
Well, thank you.
Top's anything I had down for me.
Well, just before we get your ideas in 1990, we almost made it through an entire podcast without mentioning King's X, but you had to go there, didn't you? So, but fair enough. There is a link with them, of course, as we know. 1990. It was a great year. Our man Sir Vivian Campbell, of course,
yes,
who we always like to talk about, Sir Vivian, was with a band called the River Dogs.
I
didn't know that. But one of many bands that, as we know, Vivian's been associated with over the years. And River Dogs. Do you know much about River Dogs, Brian?
I do. In fact, the River Dogs
surprised me.
In the River Dogs, the River Dogs debut album would have made my top 5. It would have made my top 5.
Okay.
There's Vivian actually wasn't. Vivian was going to produce the River Dogs,
Sir
Vivian. He was just actually going to record the band and produce the album. And I think basically what happened was they all headed off in the studio. Whether the other guitarist left or he was asked to leave, I have no idea. But Vivian joined the band in 1990, and it's a great album. There's tracks on it like Rain, Spooky. It's just, and the singer Rob Lamont, really, really good. It sounds like an American 4-piece. You could live. They would do songs like Toy Soldier. They would do Humble Pie. They would go back to, Vivian likes his classic, his classic rock and stuff. So River Dogs is a great album. And around that time, Vivian had just, he'd obviously left Whitesnake, and he would go on to do Shadow King, which is another project with Lou Gramm, and then finally Leopards. Yep. But River Dogs, again, a great album. But it's one of those albums in 1990 where you come back to it. They released their next album was 2011, River Dogs. You know what I mean? It just didn't happen for them at the time, but the songs are great.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, we always like to mention, our favourite underused guitarist, so we thought we'd mention him in the context of 1990, of course. Yeah. Other things happened that year. We lost Stevie Ray Vaughan in 1990, sadly, in a helicopter crash, which, 30 years ago. I mean, what a legacy he left. The amazing Stevie Ray Vaughan.
I was going to see him. I had tickets. I walked past. I remember walking past a venue in Newcastle upon Tyne, and they had and he was supposed to be touring later that year, and there was posters up, etc. And I was going, I'll go and get tickets and go see Stevie Ray, and it never happened. It's probably one of those few artists where you kind of go, I never had a chance to see him previously. I would have loved to have seen Stevie Ray Vaughan. Yeah.
Absolutely. So anyway, that was 1990 for me, Brian. Yeah. Anything you would like to add?
Yeah, the only thing I would add, it was a very eclectic year. 1990.
Indeed. Well, as you can see from my selections,
from your selection, because whenever I picked my top 5, I didn't pick any of the 5, and I'm
really?
Yep. I'm not even gonna. We'll not go into them in terms of the detail of them, but here were my top 5 in no particular order. I had, I'll keep my favourite to the end. Black Crowes. I'm thinking about the albums in 1990, which I went out and bought and went, I really like that. Black Crowes, Shake Your Money Maker. They were the new Stones. I really liked Extreme Porno Graffiti. Yes, More Than Words was all over the charts, but some of the, Decadent Dance, some of the material that was on that. Steve Vai, actually, I really liked Steve Vai's solo album Passion and Warfare, which came out in 1990.
Amazing.
Yeah. There was another band who will remain nameless who released their third album called Faith, Hope, Love in 1990, but we'll move on.
Okay. Should we mention them?
No.
Just because it gets too cryptic otherwise. when we talk about King's X.
Okay, exactly. The band
is King's X.
They're going to become Voldemort. They're going to be the band we can't name. But I love King's X. So King's X brought out their third album, which actually was their biggest selling album, and then sales dropped then. But my favorite album of 1990, and I think Metallica have a lot to thank this band and the orchestrator, it's Queensryche's Empire. And for me, a lot of people talk about Operation Mindcrime as the pinnacle of Queensryche's career. But if you listen to Empire, the album by Queensryche, and Best I Can, Empire the song, and to me the single Silent Lucidity, which for the album itself is worth it, and it was orchestrated by Michael Kamen. So all of the strings and all of the stuff that was on Silent Lucidity, there's a couple of different mixes. I think you could go on to your favorite channel of listening to music or by it, and there's a few mixes where it's really orchestrated, and I listen to that and I go, I wonder if the Metallica guys, when they were listening to Queensryche, because remember Queensryche did the likes of the Monsters of Rock. They were on the Monsters of Rock in America, so you had Van Halen, Metallica, and Silent Lucidity, and I just thought the orchestration, and then you go into the Black Album, and Michael Kamen did all of the orchestration for The Unforgiven, Nothing Else Matters, and then obviously did the S&M stuff. So my album in 1990, Matt, was Empire by Queensryche.
Good choice, and a great song. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Silent Lucidity, it's an absolute classic, isn't it? Yeah, lovely. I like that. That's good.
Yes, 1990.
Good. So I think I need to give you a challenge for next time, don't I? I do. Well, I do. I mean, that's how these things work.
It does. What?
Otherwise, they're not a feature, are they? They just kind of stop in midair. So I am going to turn the clock back a little bit for you, and I am going to challenge you to come back to us. I say us. That's me and our 10 listeners that I mentioned last time. With your favourite albums of 1987.
Yay!
I thought you might like that. I'll give you that one, open goal for you, Brian. Okay. All right. So 1987 next time, please.
Oh, King's X didn't release any albums in 1980s.
Exactly. That's why I chose it.
What I would say is, as this is now a feature, and for those people that are listening in the podcast, thank you for everybody who's subscribed and liked the page so far. We'd be really... Matt's gone through his top 5 albums in 1990. Let us know on social media what your favourite albums of 1990 were. If there was any that you shared with Matt and I, and we can tot them up for the next show to see which ones of Matt's you thought were the best, and if any of them liked maybe any of the ones that I chose. So we will keep this as a feature.
It's competition.
Yes,
it's north against south.
No. It's not.
And the Facebook page, of course, is as we know, for those about to pod, we salute you.
Absolutely,
you can find us there.
And I'm sure all of the Iron Maiden fans, who I have a few friends who are following it now, they'll come back to say, why didn't you pick No Prayer for the Dying? It was released in 1990.
No, it's a good point. Yeah, I know, absolutely. There were tons of good things. You know, we could have chosen another 5-10 things. That's the thing when you delve into these years, or you think back. So I did that thing that you did, where I thought, no, surely that was released then. No, actually, no, it was a year before. But anyway, so yeah, regular feature.
Yep.
My year in rock, and yours next time will be 1987.
Looking forward to it.
Okay,
and I want, and I need.
Yes, all right. Well, no prizes for knowing what number one's going to be, of course.
Might not be.
We're interested in 2 to 5 then. Anyway, should we move on? Let's move on,
we
Brian.
can.
Let's go. Where are we going next on our musical journey?
Our musical journey. I was going to talk about supergroups.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Supergroups.
Yeah.
Interesting.
One of my favourite bands in the world are releasing a new album in February next year. It's a band called Transatlantic. So Transatlantic are Pete Travis from Marillion, Ronnie Stolt from the Flower Kings, Neil Morse from Spock's Beard and lots of other stuff, and obviously Mike Portnoy from formerly of Dream Theater, Winery Dogs, etc. In fact, we could probably do what's all of Mike's supergroups that he's been in. So it just got me thinking, on the release of that album, there's a supergroup, and it got me thinking, wow, who of all of the bands that have been all over since 1969 or whatever, who are my favourite supergroups, and where has a supergroup surprised me, and where has a supergroup disappointed me? So I was just kind of going to go through some of my favourite supergroups where I was kind of surprised, and then get views from yourself, Matt, in terms of if they're, in terms of what your thoughts were on supergroups. Did you see them as a supergroup, and see how we went there?
Yeah. Yeah, interesting one. I have to say I'm in the school, if you don't mind me saying,
Yeah.
because I want to um, I'm not a big fan of the term supergroups. I mean, I think it's one of those things where bands get labelled with it, and it's a little bit, it's become a cliche within
Yeah.
itself. Oh, look, so and so's joined so and so, and they become a supergroup.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of. I'm a big fan of the actual bands. Don't get me wrong, but I do have a bit of a problem with the actual term, because when is a supergroup not a supergroup? That is the question. Let's take your example from earlier when you started to hum a bit of Def Leppard.
Yes.
And you could argue that Def Leppard are a bit of a supergroup, because you've got the former member of Girl in Phil Collin. I'm just using this as a silly example.
Yeah.
And then you've got Vivian Campbell, ex everybody, and then you've obviously got the core members of Def Leppard. So I don't know. I'm fine with it, but yeah, there's been some good ones. Don't get me wrong, and there's been great ones over the years, and some of my favourite bands are supergroups. But that's just my view on it.
No, exactly. And I think it's interesting in the 1970s. So you come out of the 60s, and you have Cream, who I think a lot of people would say that Cream are one of the first supergroups, where you've got Clapton, Baker and Bruce all came from very successful bands, came together and created a new sound in what Cream was. And I think that's the interesting thing with Cream, as they were all successful in their own right, came together and then actually did something really really unique. And you can then move into some of the shorter lived supergroups, and actually, to your point, you take something like Blind Faith, which was Cream dissolves. Blind Faith are formed out of, obviously Ginger Baker and Clapton, then with Steve Winwood plus Rick Gretsch. And it's like they do one gig at Hyde Park and then it's like over. So I do think you run that fine line between when does a supergroup become just a little project and as a little stepping stone for something, and then it all just falls to bits. And then during the 70s, I felt in the 70s with supergroups, you think about ELP, for example, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. To me, they were the archetypical they were kind of, I'm not going to say anti-Led Zeppelin, because Led Zeppelin were, you could nearly say that Led Zeppelin were a supergroup in some ways with the way
you could. Yeah, absolutely.
But I felt that with the likes of Keith Emerson and Greg Lake and Carl Palmer, they were at the top of their game, and there's a pomposity to, you do your first gig and I think they may have headlined Isle of Wight Festival in 1970 as their first gig. It's like, oh, we're a supergroup, we'll do this. And through the 70s, it felt supergroups were for the prog guys. So you had Beck Bogart. Jeff Beck was with Tim Bogart and a piece. You had the Mashavishnu Orchestra. You had UK. You had all that, and so it was all, to me, prog seemed to be where supergroups were. Yeah, and then I think where the first supergroup that in I would probably say my favorite first ever supergroup was Asia. So Asia to me was. It was classic rock, Heat of the Moment, Soul Survivor, that album, Geffen Records, gazillion sales in America. And I went, John Wetton, what an amazing singer, all the power chords. And I didn't know any of the members of that band. I didn't know the legacy of Asia. And it's kind of like, here's a supergroup, and I'm going, no, that's just Asia. They're just a good band. So my first band for being a bona fide supergroup, because of all of the parts together of being, the legacy of ELP in Asia, Yes, and all of the stuff that the guys did. That was a really, really good band. Through the 80s, from a supergroup's perspective, oh my goodness, it really kicked off. Blue Murder, Badlands, Mr. Big.
Yeah.
And I would probably say, for me, Mr. Big is my number 2 favourite supergroup, because you've got Billy Sheehan, Eric Martin, Pat Torpey, and Paul Gilbert. All virtuosos. And I think they were super musicians. Did I know who Paul Gilbert was before Mr. Big? I knew him from instructional videos and all that kind of stuff. But when I look at that as a band and as a supergroup, they would have been the next on my list as a band, where they really surprised me for the musicality and did something different, because it wasn't all technical diddly stuff. It was really, really good songwriting, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so that to me is where, from a supergroup's perspective, where it worked well. In the 80s, some didn't work so well, Matt. And this is where it can work, and unfortunately the two examples probably involves my favorite singer, or one of my favorite singers. I think I said David Coverdale at the beginning of the episode. So Paul Rodgers is one of my favorite singers, and to me the firm should have been Chris Slade, Manfred Mann, Tony Franklin, amazing bass player, Jimmy Page, and Paul Rodgers. It should have been the band of the mid-80s. Huge. Should have been huge. And it wasn't. The albums are okay. They never played any of their Zeppelin or any of their back catalogue when they did the 2 tours that they did. And to me, as a supergroup, that just didn't work. And to your point, maybe the legacy of Free and Bad Company on Rodgers' shoulders, and what Jimmy was having on Zeppelin's, 1984, maybe everybody wanted, Free Zeppelin or Bad Lead, whatever. I can't think of a good analogy for that. So Lead Company. Lead Company. Yes, Lead Snake and whatever. So to me, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And interestingly, when we move into the 2000s, it's gone very quiet. I can only think of 3 supergroups in the last 20 years that are of any interest to me at all. Audio Slave?
Yeah, good choice.
Them Crooked Vultures?
Yeah.
And finally, Chicken Food.
I'd throw into the mix Velvet Revolver, of course, as a supergroup of the 2000s.
I think that's. Do you know what? Did you go and see? Did you ever see them?
I'm going to do it. I did a couple of times, actually. Yeah.
What did you think?
Okay. I think the thing is with a band like that, and again it goes back to the legacy thing. You're waiting for Sweet Child of Mine and Paradise City and so on, and possibly the odd Stone Temple Pilots song, if you were that fan of that leg of the band, as it were. Yeah. And no, I was fine with them. I think I think there has been a few. I mean, recently, I don't know whether you remember, because you're probably too drunk at the time. We saw the Sons of Apollo, who are a modern supergroup.
It was early in the day.
It was early, so you were drunk. It was, which includes Mr. Portnoy and Jeff Scott Soto and others.
Yes. So
I think it's still a concept that bands are kind of getting together and becoming a supergroup. Not consciously, I don't think, but they think let's get together and see how it goes. Yeah. So, which has probably always been the case. I think the thing with supergroups, you just touched upon it a little bit, is I think it's a question of timing. I suppose depends on when they kind of from a is there an opportunity for them? Do they come along at the right time? Is there too much? I think you hit the nail on the head. Actually, is there too much of a legacy of the the individual members of the band? Too much pressure on them to play, as you say, the Free, the Bad Company, the Guns N' Roses, the Led Zepp, whatever it might be. I think the example you use, which is an exception, is the excellent Chicken Foot. And I think they didn't seem to put themselves under too much pressure, and we've seen them a couple of times.
Yeah.
And they've got a couple of albums out, 1 and 3, which I think was hilarious. You would call your second album 3. But it just kind of demonstrates their attitude, which is basically, good musicianship, have a good time.
Yes.
And let's not bother about doing too many kind of Red Hot Chili Peppers or, Sammy Hagar or Van Halen or whatever. Because as we know, that's Chad Smith, Michael Anthony, Sammy Hagar, and Joe Satriani.
Yeah.
So, I think it's a good talking point, Bri. As you say, they've been around for a while.
Yeah.
You could go back to, as you say, Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young and so on, the Cream, right up to date with, I suppose there's bands even being formed now that are technically supergroups. So, very interesting.
And I think
interesting.
And I think, do you know what's really interesting during the COVID, during the lockdown period as well too, how a lot of the, let's call them lockdown projects where I think we may have mentioned this in other podcasts where you've got the likes of Joel Hoekstra and Mike Portnoy with Dino, the young, I think he's Croatian singer, and they put out a cover version of Jefferson Starship Airplane. Yeah, Gian. And you kind of go in there's musicians getting together, and they can put something out, and you're kind of going, well, it's not a supergroup, but it's nice seeing great musicians being able to play together and have that. And maybe that's what technology allows great musicians to actually get together separately to do something really productive, which is one of the things I like about the Frontiers record label is they'll get, the likes of the Dead Daisies, Glenn Hughes is singing in them, or you'll have George Lynch singing with Dino doing Dirty Shirley, and you'll have all the guys out of Dokken will be with the singer out of Warrant, and they can all do this, but it's deemed as a project because I think you and I love Chickenfoot. I couldn't get enough Chickenfoot, and every time I seemed to open Classic Rock magazine or Planet Rock, it was Planet Rock really took Chickenfoot to their bosom, and all we were basically saying is, can we have a tour? We just don't want one night at the Shepherd's Bush Empire. When can we see more? And unfortunately, the demand of the 4 guys in the band just don't allow you to see a great band like that. So
you're absolutely right.
So there you go. So that's a little run through Supergroups. As I say, I know we had some comments on the Facebook page, but really interested from everybody in terms of what your views are. You got my views in terms of what I think constitutes a good supergroup. So hit us up on social media and let us know what you think around the supergroups, the concept of the phenomenon of those, and where it lies today.
Indeed. Yeah.
There you go.
That's good. Man. Yeah, brilliant. Right. So we were going to talk about Hidden Gems, I think, which is another new feature.
New feature.
Oh my goodness, they're coming thick and fast, these new features. So the idea with Hidden Gems is they are songs or albums or even bands that we, think are a little bit underrated, a little bit unloved, and deserve more exposure. And
that I haven't mentioned already.
That we haven't mentioned already, and we're not allowed to mention Thin Lizzy or Diamond Head or King's X. So I will kick off, if I may.
Yes,
Brian. As we're talking about the 90s earlier with 1990, I had two ideas actually for Hidden Gems. I'm just going to give you one today, but I did want to talk a little bit about the album Fully Completely by the band The Tragically Hip. Which I think is not one that's known to you, Bryce. So,
it's not. I am shaking my head here virtually and going,
I know.
Who? Are they Canadian?
Yeah, they are. Well, they were. They were Canadian. The Tragically Hip, huge in Canada.
Yes.
I saw them over here in about, I think it was a year. It was 1997. It was a night that Tony Blair won the election. And I would recommend an album called Fully Completely, which is an absolute cracker. of an album. It's got some amazing songs on it, and I very much recommend it to everyone. If you live in Canada, we do have a couple of Canadian listeners. You'll probably know Tragically Hip, of course, but the rest of the world probably not so. So I give you the Tragically Hip and Fully Completely. That's my hidden gem for this week, Brian.
Excellent. Oh, that's. Do you know what? I'll check those out.
Was that your one?
No.
You weren't going to go for that as well, were you?
No, I wasn't going to go for that one. I just remember. I know we talked about, and I haven't watched it. I think the lead singer passed away a couple of years ago, didn't he? Did he?
He did. Gord Downey. Yeah, he sadly died of a progressive brain tumor.
Yeah.
Sad. He was a national hero in Canada.
I think. I think on. I'm gonna say. There's a document. I think Sky Arts actually. There was a documentary about him and about the band, because obviously, as you say, they're kind of. They're well thought of. You know, they're one of Canada's premier bands, and I actually do think there's a nice documentary talking about the band and the unfortunate demise of the lead singer. But he was supposed to be very, very charismatic and whatever. So I will, on your recommendation, give that band a bit of a listen to, because you've done this well this week. I liked your Diamond Head track.
Thank you.
And I will give a listen to the Tragically Hip.
Exactly. Well, you're very welcome. And that documentary you're talking about is called Long Time Running. If anyone sees it anywhere, it's, as you say, well worth a look. Okay, so that's my hidden gem for this week, Brian. That's Tragically Hip.
Excellent.
And Fully Completely.
Excellent. Oh, it's good. I know it's good.
Did you have any thoughts? Did you give it any thought? Have you got a hidden gem tucked away anywhere?
I do have a hidden gem tucked away, and it's from It's going to be from 1990 as well. Because would you say the Tragically Hip was were they a rock band, or were they pop arts, indie, alternative? What was the sound of
all of those? All of those. Brian, you just encapsulated them. They were kind of rock, I would say, certainly guitar-driven rock. Check them out. So
my hidden gem is from 1990 because. Mm-hmm. And it's again, it's a band who released 2 albums over their period of being together, and it's a hidden gem. It's the debut album by a band called Jellyfish. Jellyfish released their first album in 1990. It's called Belly Button, and it's basically 70s, it's Beatles harmonies with amazing orchestration, etc. Short-lived band, split up in 1994. But my hidden gem would be Jellyfish, bringing it right up to date. The band themselves, 3 members. Actually, there's a Guns N' Roses connection here. The band themselves. There's been lots of talk about trying to get Jellyfish back together, and it's one of those things that won't happen. However, 3 former members, Tim Smith, the bass player and guitarist, he was working with Noel Gallagher for a while, and the Jets, and Roger Manning Jr. He's worked with Beck. He's actually played keyboards with Cheap Trick. So Roger, Tim, and Eric Dover. And I'm saying Eric Dover to you. Do you remember who Eric Dover was at all, Matt?
I do not, no.
Eric Dover was the lead singer, and he was the guitar player in Jellyfish for a while, but he actually ended up being the lead singer in Slash's Snake Pit.
Yes, and what a singer.
And if you watch, and it's exactly, and do you know what? He's a phenomenal guitar player as well. And some of sorry to not to talk about. We've talked about Eddie's passing, but I think one of the things which has been really interesting on YouTube is when people have posted up things about, Eddie Van Halen. Eddie was at a party at his house, and I would just, everybody, if you want to go and check out on YouTube, there there's some video footage of Eddie doing Jump, and I know that Derek Sherinian from Sons of Apollo and Dream Theater is playing keyboards, but the guy singing at Eddie's backyard doing Jump and a whole bunch of stuff is Eric Dover. And Eric is singing his backside off. So the three of the guys, Eric, Tim, and Roger, have got back together, and they're now going under the name of the Licorice Quartet, and they're putting out EPs of music. It's very ELO, very 70s, layered harmonies, etc. And the third EP's coming out this week. So Jellyfish would be my hidden gem, alongside the Tragically Hip for this episode, Matt. You put me on the spot.
Great choice.
Excellent.
Great choices. Very good. Thank you, Brian.
Cool.
I enjoyed that.
Excellent.
Yeah, good. And I've now thought of another hidden gem for next time. When you talked about Eric Dover, of course, Slash's Snake Pit Ain't Life Grand album.
It's a what a great.
We'll talk about that another day.
We will do. We'll do.
So, Brian, it's been fun as always, and we should do this again sometime.
That would be, absolutely. We shall do this again. So, thanks to everybody for listening in, for subscribing, listening to the podcast. Again, thank you for all of the comments. We're starting to get comments through on the various social media channels. Yep, platforms. We'll get the lingo right one of these days. So check us out. Subscribe on Apple Pods. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Hit us up, and we shall see you all next time. So until we see you again, rock on. See you, Matt.
See you guys. See you, Brian. Take care. All the best.